Can psychedelics transform you into a racist? So psychedelics makes you love everyone, right? That's the story we've been told since the 60s. Peace, love, and LSD. Historically, the height of the left-wing liberal counterculture was always marked by hippies taking LSD and joining drum circles while they sang Kumbaya. Then Timothy Leary came along, who went from being a respected Harvard psychology professor to becoming the most famous advocate for psychedelic exploration, and according to President Nixon, the most dangerous man in America. He was convinced that psychedelics represented the next stage of human evolution, and his phrase, turn on, tune in, drop out, became the unofficial motto of the entire counterculture. Timothy Leary's motto was, everyone belongs, divisions are meant for control, abandon traditional mindsets for newer ones that are more dynamic and inclusive than previous mindsets. There's a reason why people describe liberals as tree-hugging hippies that take LSD and proclaim grand ideas like peace on earth. This is the stereotype that has been constructed from decades of media portrayal and societal conditioning. But these are only perceptions, not universal truths. They're used to stereotype the psychedelic community as having a symbiotic relationship with liberal thought and progressive mindsets. However, do psychedelics share any commonality with right-wing ideology? But first, what is right-wing ideology? So everything that was just mentioned, the we are all one, people coming together, tree-hugging hippies, that is the exact opposite of right-wing ideology. But first, let me make this abundantly clear. Right-wing ideology is not inherently racist. Let me say that again. Right-wing ideology is not inherently racist. Some of you may believe it is, but you're wrong. The core of conservatism relates to free markets, preserving cultural and traditional values, and national sovereignty. Those concepts aren't racist. However, there are some ways that certain aspects of right-wing thinking can sometimes create pathways towards racism, even unintentionally. For example, nationalism can be defined as identifying with one's own nation and its interests. On the surface, that's pretty reasonable. But nationalism can also transform into viewing certain groups as authentically belonging to the group rather than others, even though they're from the same country. When cultural identity gets tied to race or ethnicity, it can exclude people based on characteristics they can't control. That's how phrases like, this land is our land, comes to be. Another idea of right-wing thinking is being conservative, which, by definition, means preserving old traditions and beliefs and the effort to resist any changes to those traditions and beliefs. Once again, on the surface, that seems somewhat reasonable. Some people are just resistant to change. However, in practice, the change that people are resisting may be the inclusion of certain racial groups that were systematically disadvantaged historically. Now these people will believe, well, why aren't they helping us out? They're helping them out. I'm getting left behind. Then there's economic nationalism, which is the idea of protecting the workers of the country. Seems like a solid concept, but it can sometimes get framed in ways that blame specific ethnic groups for getting your job rather than addressing complex economic force issues. Also, those jobs are free because no one wants them. And there are many examples of how principled conservative positions get hijacked into a vortex of overt racism. And we don't have time to get into all of them because we still have to answer the question, do psychedelics make you racist? In 2022, I went to ICPR, the most prestigious psychedelic science conference out there. I sat down to listen to a talk by evolutionary biologist Brian Pace titled Right-Wing Psychedelia, Red Pills for Sale. In the talk, Pace stunned a packed audience by discussing how psychedelics are being used amongst alt-right extremists. It was a topic that I'd never even considered for the sole reason that I was under the belief that psychedelics were just for hippies. His talk was actually based off his co-authored paper titled Right-Wing Psychedelia, Case Studies in Cultural Plasticity and Political Pluripotency. Ah, that last word, pluripotency. It's actually a biological term, but in this context, it means that something is capable of fueling both peaceful awakenings and hateful rhetoric. But how can psychedelics fuel hate and racism? Well, it's just that the effects of psychedelics and racist ideology, they sort of use the same mental mechanisms to exert their influence. That's a big statement, and we're going to unpack all of that right now. There's one thing that these alt-right racist groups do to recruit and maintain their ranks, and it's using the concept of spirituality. These pseudo-spiritual frameworks like Nordic mythology, esoteric Christianity, Germanic paganism, or invented mystical traditions allows for racists to pack political ideas and give them transcendent meaning within spirituality. Suddenly, it's not about you hating someone, and instead it fits into a much bigger concept, an architecture of hatred that is spiritually justified. And also, let me make this clear. Believing in things like Nordic mythology is not racist at all. It's actually really dope. One of my bachelor degrees is actually in religious studies, so I'm well aware of how interesting Nordic mythology is and paganism, everything. But these right-wing groups have hijacked these mythological constructs, spiritual belief systems, and religions. And they've deprecated them into something that is grossly far from what they truly are. And if you appreciate any of these traditions, that should make you incredibly angry. But guess what psychedelics do? They enhance spiritual experiences. They make people feel connected to something greater than themselves, gods, entities, universal consciousness, whatever you want to call it. So when someone already predisposed to extremist spiritual frameworks takes psychedelics, those experiences can feel like divine validations of their beliefs. The mushroom showed me the truth about my people, or entities confirm what I already knew about racial purity. But here's the thing. Psychedelics also create intense feelings of group bonding and connectedness. And this is where it gets tricky, because feeling deeply connected to a group isn't inherently bad. It's actually beautiful when it's your family, your community, your friends. But when that group is defined by who it excludes rather than who it includes, when the bonding is based on us versus them, then that psychedelic enhanced group cohesion can strengthen racist ideologies rather than dissolve them. There's also this concept in psychedelic experiences called significance. Everything feels incredibly meaningful and important during your trip. Your thoughts, your insights, your revelations, they all feel like cosmic truths rather than just thoughts. So if you're already harboring racist ideas and you have a psychedelic experience, those ideas might not feel like ignorant prejudices anymore. Now they feel like profound universal truths that have been revealed to you by the cosmos itself. And there's really one thing that explains all of this. Psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. Think of psychedelics like a megaphone for your mind. If you put a megaphone up to beautiful music, you get louder, beautiful music. If you put a megaphone up to garbage, you get louder garbage. The megaphone doesn't change the content, it just makes it more intense. Psychedelics work the same way with your thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. They don't inherently make you more compassionate or more hateful. They amplify what's already there. This happens because psychedelics increases cognitive flexibility. Your brain becomes more open to new connections and interpretations. But here's the catch. That flexibility can be directed towards any belief system, not just positive ones. Psychedelics also dramatically increases suggestibility. Your brain becomes like wet clay, more moldable, more impressionable. And what shapes that clay? Your set and setting, your mindset going in, and your environment during the experience. If your set is filled with racist beliefs and your setting is surrounded by people who share those beliefs, the psychedelic experience is going to reinforce and amplify those racist ideas, not magically transform them into love and acceptance. There's this beautiful study by neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris that shows psychedelics increases what's called cognitive flexibility. So when someone poses the question, do psychedelics make you racist? The answer is they can, but they can also make you more compassionate. It all depends on what's already in your head and what environment you're tripping in. But why do people think that psychedelics automatically makes you more liberal than left-wing? It's simple: environmental conditioning and selective exposure. Think about it. Where do most people encounter psychedelics? At music festivals filled with progressive artists, in underground scenes that celebrate counterculture, in therapeutic settings run by liberal-leaning practitioners, in communities that already embrace alternative lifestyles. It's like saying veganism makes you liberal. No, being around other vegans who statistically tend to be more liberal might expose you to liberal ideas, but the vegetables themselves, they aren't political. The psychedelic community has been predominantly left-leaning since the 1960s. So when someone enters that community, they're not just taking psychedelics, they're also absorbing the culture, values, social connections of that community. Plus, there's also confirmation bias. We notice and remember the hippies talking about universal love, but we ignore or don't hear about the white supremacist who had a spiritual awakening that confirmed his racist beliefs. And here's another thing. The very act of taking an illegal substance puts you in opposition to traditional authority structures, which is inherently a more liberal position. The context of psychedelic use has been anti-establishment from the beginning. But here's what might shock you. The alt-right, they're already doing psychedelics, and they've been doing it for decades. Let's go back in history. In the 1970s, neo-Nazi groups were experimenting with LSD for what they called spiritual warfare. They believed psychedelics could help them connect with their ancestral spirits and achieve racial consciousness. Even earlier, the CIA's MK Ultra experiments used psychedelics in an authoritative, manipulative context, proving that these substances don't automatically create peace-loving hippies. Today, you can find threads on alt-right forums discussing red pilling through psychedelics. They use terms like ethno-nationalism enlightenment and talk about mushrooms being used to connect with their European ancestors. There are alt-right influencers who openly discuss their psychedelic use, and they just frame it differently. Instead of we are all one, it's my people are one. Instead of universal love, it's racial pride. And yes, there are some white nationalist leaders who credit psychedelic experiences with awakening them to their racial ideology. Bro, I won't name them because I don't want to give them a platform. But the research is out there. On Stormfront, one of the oldest white supremacist forums out there, you can find threads titled Psychedelics and Racial Consciousness, where users share how their trips confirm their racist beliefs. The scary part, they use the same language as everyone else. They talk about awakening and spiritual insights and seeing the truth. The only difference is what they think that truth is. Now here's what's both terrifying and beautiful. Racist and non-racist people are doing the exact same substance and having profound spiritual experiences. Yes, psychedelics do bring people together. Think about that for a second. Right now, somewhere in the world, a racist is having a DMT breakthrough that he believes confirms his racial ideology. And at the same time, the exact moment, someone else is having a DMT breakthrough that shows that we're all connected as one big happy family. Same molecule, same brain receptors, same serotonin system, but completely opposite conclusions. In a weird way, this should give us hope. Because if psychedelics can amplify hate, they can also amplify love. If they can strengthen division, they can also strengthen unity. The key is intention, education, and community. We need to be intentional about the set and setting we create around psychedelic experiences. We need to educate about what these substances can do. They're amplifiers, not automatic enlightenment machines. And we need to build communities that guide these powerful experiences towards healing and connection rather than separation and hate. Because at the end of the day, psychedelics are just tools. And like any tool, a hammer can build a house or it can break a window. A knife can prepare food or it can cause harm. It all depends on who's holding it and what they intend to do with it. All right, let's recap what we've learned. Psychedelics don't automatically make you liberal, peaceful, or loving. That's just a stereotype based on their historical associations with counterculture movements. Right-wing ideology is not inherently racist, but certain aspects can create pathways towards racism through nationalism, cultural preservation, and in-group, out-group thinking, like us versus them. Psychedelics and racist ideology actually share some mechanisms. Both rely on spiritual frameworks, group bonding, and the feeling that your beliefs are cosmically significant. The key concept, psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. They're like megaphones for your mind. They make everything louder, but they don't change the content. People think psychedelics are left-wing because most psychedelic communities are left-wing. But that's correlation, not causation. Alt-right groups have been using psychedelics for decades. They just frame the experiences differently. Racial consciousness as opposed to universal consciousness. However, we still have hope. If the same substance can amplify hate, they can definitely amplify love. It all comes down to setting, and community. So can psychedelics make you racist? Technically, yes. But they can also make you more compassionate. Also a yes. They amplify what's already there, which means the real work happens before, during, and after the trip, not in the molecule itself. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Zeus, this is terrifying. Should I be worried about taking psychedelics? Look, Knowledge is power. Understanding these substances are amplifiers rather than automatic enlightenment machines make you more responsible psychonaut. The solution isn't to avoid psychedelics. No, it's to approach them with respect, preparation, and the community support they deserve. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic, then subscribe on Patreon. That's where I break down all the stuff and give you additional resources. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Your Drug on Brains. Be sure to like and subscribe. Very important. Leave a comment. I read all of them. And follow on X, TikTok, and Instagram at Tipado, Tipado. And remember, the most radical thing you can do with psychedelics isn't just to take them, it's to think critically about them.